Hello and welcome. You're watching this special episode of Spotlight Ukraine. We're going to talk about some predictions and expectations for 2023. And we'll start with the war game-changing factor. This is a Patriot system. Can it change the war in Ukraine in the upcoming year? We're going to talk about restoring of Ukrainian infrastructure and investment till the victory day. Enjoy and don't forget to like, share and subscribe.
Recognizes that Ukraine has earned or achieved irreversible momentum, that Ukrainian forces have the initiative. And so their only hope for Russia, for the Kremlin, is to attempt to drag this out, to make the war go longer in hopes that the West will lose the will to continue supporting Ukraine. So they're going to attack infrastructure to put hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian citizens on the road into Europe. They're going to trade bodies for time with these recently mobilized Russian soldiers. They don't care how many of them are killed. It's just to buy time. And so key for all of us is to stick together, to keep in mind why this is important, not just for Ukraine, but for so much larger, and to help accelerate Ukraine's victory over Russia, not let the Russians drag it out or prolong it.
By the way, talking about the victory, will this winter decide who's going to win this war?
I think it's, again, this is a great question. I think it's which side uses the winter most effectively. My sense is that the Ukrainian General Staff, which has been so effective and so professional, will take advantage of the better trained, more highly motivated soldiers on the Ukrainian side and support from the West, and keep the pressure on Russian forces as much as they can within these circumstances. And of course, it will be extremely cold and miserable for Ukrainian soldiers operating in conditions like what we're seeing right here. It'll be much worse for Russian soldiers who are not properly trained, are not properly equipped, and do not have the good leadership. So I think Ukrainian General Staff will want to continue the pressure, continue to pound away on Russian logistics. The Russians will just hope that we will all lose the will to support. I think this is the last winter that Russia can use gas as a weapon. They've already tried that. And I think that next summer, this coming summer, 2023, that Ukraine will have liberated Crimea.
Well, by the way, in one of your interviews, you've already said, I'll quote, if the West sticks together with Ukraine and keeps the sanctions on, it's quite possible that the Ukrainian army will push Russian forces back to 23rd February line till the end of this year. Are we out of the schedule or not?
I think it's not likely that we're going to be at the 23 February line by the end of December. But what's more important is that the Ukrainian General Staff gets the conditions set so that early in the new year, they're able to start the liberation of the Crimean Peninsula. So I think that it will be tough to meet that original timeline that I had anticipated earlier as possible, but that'll be tough. But I think, of course, the Ukrainian General Staff is working in a very deliberate, methodical, professional way to get the conditions right so that no Ukrainian soldier is lost due to trying to rush something before it's ready. So I think that they've got it on the right timeline. The key is Crimea being liberated by the end of next summer, because Crimea, that's the prize.
Do the civilians have to expect new attacks by Russian forces?
Yeah, I think that the Russians are going to continue this as long as they have cruise missiles, because, again, they have no other real options. They probably are working on the possibility for some sort of a spring offensive, something like that, to try and change the battlefield dynamics. But I don't think that they will have the logistics in place or have made the corrections to their many problems in order to do that successfully. So, in my view, the Ukrainian General Staff is going to keep up the pressure, and the West, so far, is going to continue to support. And that's why I feel confident.
Let's talk a bit about the promised Patriot system. How long will it take to train Ukrainian soldiers to operate the Patriot system?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly advanced system, right? One of the world's best. So it probably will take several weeks to actually get them up to speed on it. And then you got to transport the system over there. So you're talking, weeks to months before it's going to be able to be gainfully employed by the Ukrainians within the country.
So it's got to be like mid-January or maybe even the early February days till we see Patriot system on the front line, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're thinking, early February at the earliest. But until then, right, they have their other anti-aircraft and anti-missile defense systems that they've employed to date that have been able to shoot down 70 to 80% of rockets and missiles coming in from Russia.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Russia claims that in case United States provides Ukraine with Patriot system, it will definitely lead to escalation. What kind of escalation can it be? What are your thoughts?
I mean, Russia hasn't shown it. I mean, they can't escalate the conflict. They have all their forces in there. They've been fighting pretty ineffectively to date. So there's really no way for them to escalate this beyond what they're doing other than just trying to shoot missiles at civilian complexes. But that's not really escalating the tactical fight. So Russia's just incapable of employing more forces effectively within Ukraine. So it's really just propaganda by Russia.
Just words and threats and nothing more.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, they don't have the ability to, if they could do more, they would actually be fighting more effectively, taking Ukrainian terrain, and they're not.
Yeah, that makes point. So do we have to expect that the United States can provide Ukraine with much more anti-missile systems to close the sky over the country?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing to do, right? I mean, at the beginning of the conflict, they were shooting down about 30% of the Russian missiles that were coming in. It's up to about 70 to 80% now, and you really want to get that up in the higher 90%. And so they've shown that ability to do it with the Patriot missile systems. I think they'll be able to get up into the 90% and be able to shoot down many of those Russian missiles. So it's definitely a possibility, depending on how many missile systems you're able to employ.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And can I ask you as an expert, what is your personal scenario of the ending of this war? Is it going to be like a negotiation, or should we fight till we liberate like Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk region?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a long, drawn-out fight until the territory is liberated, right? I mean, we saw in 2014, 2015, Ukraine never got any closer to getting Donetsk and Luhansk back, or Crimea. And so any kind of negotiated settlement, no one has any expectation that they're going to be able to get that terrain back. And so it's going to be a fight until the territory can be liberated by the Ukrainians, because the Russians aren't going to into any negotiations with any intent of ever giving them back in the long term.
So no negotiations, but we know that Russia has already mobilized more than 100,000 of people, and there are plans to mobilize more and more. So it's going to be long.
Yeah, so I mean, but keep in mind, right? I mean, Russia's best forces were at the beginning of the conflict, and those were decimated. And so as Russia throws more at it, they're less trained, they're ill-equipped. Their morale is even lower than the Russians were at the beginning of the war. Many of these people don't even want to be in the military. And so they're putting more forces at it, but they're less and less capable every day that they employ new forces in the conflict, where the Ukrainians, I mean, it's a brutal fight for them, but the morale is there. They're fighting for the defense of their nation, where even the Russian military has no idea why they're there. So they're not motivated. So it'll be long, just because Russia has so many forces.
We got a saying in Ukraine that the Russian army is not big, it's just long.
Yeah, I mean, it's big in terms of its effective. I mean, in terms of if sure numbers, you're counting soldiers, but if you're talking about effective soldiers, I'll take one Ukrainian soldier over 20 Russian soldiers any day.
Well, this winter gonna be like the definite moment we can say that after this, Ukraine can win this war?
I mean, I think Ukraine has demonstrated already that it can win this war. I think it's just a matter of time, and part of that depends on continuing to get resupplied from the West because they are a smaller military. They have to replace their losses that are attrited throughout the conflict. But as long as they're able to replace their combat losses, Ukraine has demonstrated over the last 10 months and really within the first month of the war in the defensive Kyiv that they can win this. It's just a matter of time and commitment by Ukraine and by its supporters.
Ben Hodges already said that Ukraine can liberate Crimea till the end of summer 2023. I agree. Can we rely on that forecast?
No, I think it's going to take longer than that, especially if you're talking. I mean, I think it's going to be years, several years.
Several years.
I mean, to liberate everything, I think Crimea is going to be its own challenge there. I mean, you see how slow it's. I mean, Ukraine's been able to make some of these large advances right down in Kherson and outside of Kharkiv, but keep in mind, right, that's where Russian forces were not massed. As Russia gets constricted into a smaller and smaller space, right, even though they're less capable, they're not a very capable fighting force. They're still they're still capable of fighting. And so that's going to be the challenge, right? As Russia gets into a smaller and smaller space, it's harder for Ukraine to dislodge them. So that's why it's really, towards the end, it's actually harder to dislodge than easier.
One of your interviews, I mean recent interviews, you said that Ukraine will win by the end of 2023. Why do you think so?
Yeah, I have no doubt about this, that Ukraine will win the war. The victory will be achieved by Ukraine in a military way by the end of next year. Most likely, I should carefully to add, most likely by the end of next year. Well, and I do agree with Mr. Stoltenberg's statement saying that we should not underestimate Russia. Even from former military officer, I can say that it's very, very bad to underestimate opponent, enemy. Yeah, but my judgment is based on the first of all on the will to find of Ukrainian nation, of Ukrainian people. Another, of course, Russia is another factor. Russia is exhausted. It's already exhausted. However, there we have to be also careful with our assessment of Russian capabilities. Russia still has a huge reserves. For instance, even in open sources, you can see they have roughly about 10,000 tanks in stocks in reserve. Most likely, 2/3 are rusted, not capable, but even then, from 3 tanks, you may produce one capable, one operational tank. So it's a huge force. They have a lot of personnel.
Are there any tools existing nowadays to bring Putin to justice and force him to end this brutal war?
Well, yes and no. The existing legal mechanisms in international law are not going to be sufficient for bringing Putin and the Russian regime to justice and holding them accountable for war crimes. Because of Russia's veto at the United Nations, it's going to be difficult to set up a new UN tribunal. The ICC is an organization to which the Russians are not a party, neither is the United States. The International Court of Justice is not appropriate for this. So there needs to be some kind of special tribunal established. And it has to be done without Russia, because Russia is actually the perpetrator here. So this is treading new ground in international law, much more similar to what had to be done with the Nuremberg trials in order to create a new framework. But in the interim, it's very important that we do what we are doing already, which is collect the data, collect the evidence, interview people, take pictures, identify the orders that were given, the chain of command, put together all of the legal cases that are necessary to be able to prove that war crimes were committed and to prove the personal responsibility of Putin and others in the Russian leadership. So that work goes on now. It'll pay off later when there is some kind of new tribunal established.
And the last question is, how long can Ukraine hold out in this difficult situation?
Well, I don't think there's any scenario here where Ukraine does not hold out. Ukraine is a sovereign, independent country. Its people are determined and resilient. They know they're Ukrainians. They know they're not confused Russians. And so the idea that Ukraine disappears or gives up is just inconceivable. What we need to do is try to make sure that Ukraine is able to fight as well as possible and to regain its territory as quickly as possible. That's the thing that's going to bring an end to the war most quickly.
Russia continues to bomb the Ukrainian energy sector. What is the next step, and how long can it last?
This is very destructive. Thousands of people may die as a result of exposure to cold weather. People may die in hospitals when hospitals don't get electricity. These are war crimes, and I hope very much that these crimes are documented, and eventually those who are responsible to deliberate destruction of civilian infrastructure in Ukraine will face the appropriate justice, international tribunals, the International Criminal Court in The Hague, or the UN tribunals. But in the 21st century, almost 80 years after World War II, my hope is that the humanity learned the lessons, and we will not allow these massive crimes to go unpunished, and that this will be also an opportunity for Ukraine to build a modern 21st century infrastructure that will utilize great experience of Ukrainian engineers and scientists in terms of nuclear. Ukraine is one of the leading nuclear powers in Europe. It produced, before the latest invasion, 50% of its electricity from nuclear energy. Ukraine will be able to develop its own natural gas, both onshore and offshore, and also the Ukrainian gas pipeline system will be changed so that the current pipe that comes from Norway with Norwegian gas can be extended to Ukraine.
Yeah, that's a really good question. But how long will it take for Ukraine to restore its energy infrastructure after the Russian attacks, and how to protect the energy system from Kremlin terrorism in the future? Is there any mechanism or scenario?
Well, the first thing that Ukraine is doing and needs to do is to have as much anti-missile defense as possible. Those missiles that Russia is lobbing into Ukraine and destroying the energy infrastructure, the grid, and the generating capacity, these missiles need to be shot down. And the strikes against Russian targets, the counter-value strikes, so for each megawatt of capacity that Putin is destroying in Ukraine, Russia needs to pay the price in terms of the countervailing strikes into the Russian territory. Unfortunately, we're at war, and at war, people do not understand nice language and the quid pro quo, the reprisals need to come from the Ukrainian armed forces into the Russian territory, so that at some point Russia will say, you know what, guys, it's not worth for us. And it doesn't have to be Russian energy infrastructure. It can be ports. It can be industrial capacity, wherever the long arm of the Ukrainian forces can reach. Yeah, nobody's interested in escalation, but at the same time, no country can tolerate that its children, its women, its old people, its population, its civilians are being targeted in a genocidal type of activity that to many of us reminds of Holodomor, when the communist regime was destroying the food supply of the Ukrainian people.
Precondition of future European security architecture will be first, Ukrainian victory. Secondly, Russia, which has no control and influence over its neighbors' security options or way of life. And thirdly, as coming out of that, Ukraine, which is a member of NATO.
Oh yeah, I see. So it's pretty clear roadmap. But Hungarian Foreign Minister Patriot confirms that Budapest will block Kyiv's participation in official meetings of the Ukraine NATO Commission. So what NATO will do with such a position of Budapest? Is Hungary Russia's Trojan horse inside NATO right now?
Many allies, also around the NATO ministers' table, called that there is an imminent need to launch these NATO-Ukrainian councils again. And this is an issue we need strongly to address also towards Hungary. But NATO is a consensus-based organization, and we have to work on that road that in a larger perspective, all the current NATO members will win if NATO is going widen. And well, Ukrainian bravery has shown what Ukrainian soldiers are capable to do, and this is going to be in future also valuable also to all NATO military and security capabilities.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And the last question, what is the exact help from Estonia to Ukraine during the struggling winter times?
Now, the most critical issue is surely energy infrastructure. We are going to provide generators, transformers to Ukraine. We are going to send also a winter equipment to Ukrainian soldiers, and also an additional military aid package to Ukraine. And this is most important, that there are like two sides. This one side is giving a humanitarian help and help to sustain the civic infrastructure. But in the meantime, it's most important also that allies will deliver to Ukraine also such weapons that Ukraine can use as a shield, as air defense, but also as a sword, as long-range missiles and particularly tanks, what President Zelensky and also Foreign Minister Kuleba clearly stated. And also particularly, we are going to deliver also already now third compact military hospital.
How can the world bring Putin to justice?
That's going to be tough. I think the first start would be kick him out of any multi-international organization until he changes his behavior. I think the world can impose more sanctions than have already been imposed. There's lots that can be done just by informing the Russian people what the Russians are doing in Ukraine, whether they're listening or not. But there's many actions. Number one is to go in 100% with helping Ukraine remove Russian military from its sovereign land. That will send a clear enough message to the people that back Putin, which he has very few friends.
Do the sanctions against Putin's regime imposed by West work now?
Absolutely. I mean, some of them are short-term sanctions, and some of them are more long-term sanctions, like the sanctions on technologies. And this is what we're seeing has resulted in limited military capability to refurbish. I mean, the damage that Putin is doing to the Russian state will take generations to repair. Could there be more sanctions? Could there be sanctions on the man himself? Absolutely. Can there be more to be done? Absolutely. Could you designate Russia a terrorist state? Absolutely. There's lots more that can be done. Sanctions, there's a great variety in them, but yeah, they're having an impact for sure.
The European Parliament has stated Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. Is there gonna be a step number 2 or 3? What does it mean?
Yeah, that's a tough call. I mean, I think the step 2 should be that all nations, not just the European organizations, all nations should do that, because it comes with very specific sanctions that can be imposed on nations that work with Russia, Russian companies. It means a lot. So I think step 2 is that follow that lead. The U.S. and other countries need to follow that lead.
Now let's talk about the winter, because the winter has come, a very tough winter for Ukrainians. And the situation at the front line is also tough. Who's more prepared for the winter, Ukrainian army or Russians in the opposite?
That's an easy one. Of course, the Ukrainians are going to be more prepared. They have stronger interior lines. The Ukrainian leadership cares about their soldiers. They'll be rotating them in from the cold. They'll be ensuring that they're equipped with all the right equipment. And it's almost a polar opposite with the Russians. The Russians don't have the winter clothing, the winterized equipment. They don't have the capability to rotate their forces. They don't have the training. This is going to have a huge impact on the Russian soldiers, and I hope more of them answer the call to just surrender, because clearly their nation doesn't care about them and is going to allow them to suffer greatly. Of course, my concern is also the Ukrainian civilians, since Russia has basically turned weather into WMD and is terrorizing the Ukrainian people. But the Ukrainian soldiers are strong, and this is going to impact the Russians way more.
If I'm not mistaken, Ben Hodges stated that Ukraine can return Crimea till the end of the next year. Do you believe in this? Is it possible?
Absolutely. I believe and I have hope. I believe the Ukrainians can reclaim all of their territories, reestablish their 1991 sovereign borders. I know they can, and that's, if that's the path that the Ukrainian people take, then they'll achieve it.
Yes, and one more question. Putin has changed his plans in this war, so now he is fighting against the civilians in Ukraine. Am I right?
Absolutely. I mean,
is he successful in this?
Yeah, absolutely. And there should be more to be done to take that last desperate act of Putin away from him, his ability to strike at the Ukrainian people, since his military can't have success on the battlefield. This is a tactic of weakness. This is showing his weakness that he's doing this, but the world should support more to stop it from continuing. And yeah, I don't let the Russian media say that Putin made a decision to do this. He was forced to do this because he's losing. He lost this war back in April, and he's losing every day, and the Ukrainians are just never going to be defeated.
Let's talk a bit about the International Tribunal to investigate the Russian crimes. Russia said that even if it's created, Moscow will not listen to it. What then is this tribunal so important for us?
So tribunal, I would say it's important, first of all, it's important for justice. And justice must be realized. Justice must be in due proper way fixed and found, and then we can decide of the ways how we can execute these sentences. This, by the way, was one of our discussion topics with Mr. Denis Malyuska, your Minister of Justice, is in Riga during Riga's Justice Leader Forum in July. And also we discussed with Mr. Malyuska in Hague and in Prague during the presidency meetings. And I would like to say also hello to my counterpart and I would say good colleague, Mr. Malyuska. You have very good Minister of Justice who have invented him and gave this his energy and knowledge to this process. And but to answer directly to your questions, I could once more repeat, there is before we can execute, before we can sentence somebody in prison or in some other way to punish, we have to have judgment on our table. We have to, in proper procedure, we have to admit what is the crimes. We have to find the right judgment, and then we can decide how we can execute it. And I believe that this will one day we will find out this possibility. Of course, also it will mostly will rely on the shoulders of Ukrainian army.
The latest data from the Russian Levada Center showed that more than 74% of respondents support military aggression against Ukraine. Does this number indicate the effectiveness of Russian propaganda machine?
Well, sort of, in the sense of how do we think that a propaganda machine like that works? I mean, look, Levada Center is you know, for many reasons, a respected organization, but not one who can avoid the difficulties of working in a dictatorship. So most of their interviews are by telephone now, which kind of indicates that people will be listened to. Often when you ask people directly about a subject like the war, they'll be reluctant to say what they really think. So I think from a methodological point of view, it can be hard to take the results of a poll like this very seriously.
Can you assume that the numbers, the real numbers, are less, not so big?
Well, I mean, again, if we're talking about methodology, yeah, that's one aspect. I mean, I personally don't believe that you know, you can even talk of public opinion in Russia, because it's a culture where public opinion doesn't really matter. People just go along with whatever the Kremlin wants. It's an authoritarian culture. It's not a democratic culture. So I'm not sure that we can think of public opinion in it like we would in a democracy. So you know, we can go much deeper and more philosophically. What does any of this mean in Russia? You know, today the Kremlin says it wants war. People say we want war. Tomorrow the Kremlin says we want peace. People say we want peace. I mean, this is not a culture that creates individuals with strong personal opinions who stand up for themselves. It's a culture of mass agreement where people just go along. So in that sense, really, any kind of public opinion polling in a dictatorship is just not very interesting in a way.
I see.
What's interesting is looking at many other factors, many other indicators. I mean, there's no protests against the war. There's no protests against the war outside of Russia by Russians in exile. So this is a culture which shows that it goes along with what the Kremlin wants, and maybe some of them take pleasure in what the Kremlin is doing, and others just agree that whatever the Kremlin does is the right thing to do.
In Russian society, they usually say that everyone has their own reality, thereby denying what Western journalists cover. How dangerous is that they're just reluctant to listen to and to accept the information made by the Western journalism?
So it's very interesting. I did some polling in Russia quite recently, and we were trying to see, was one of the questions we asked, to what extent do you think is truth objective, or does everybody have their own reality? And the closer people were to supporting the Kremlin and to watching state media, the more likely they were to think that truth is subjective and that objective facts don't exist. And the less they watched state media and the further away they were from identifying with the Kremlin, the more they thought objective truth does exist. So one of the main lines of the Kremlin's propaganda has been to say that truth is not objective, that it's completely subjective, that you know, people might say there are war crimes in Bucha, but that's just one opinion. And you never really know what's going on, is sort of the line, and to spread confusion that way. So it was very interesting to see that borne out in sociology. That, yeah. So again, something like that I think is much more interesting to research than support for or against the war through opinion polling. By the way, I mean, there's been other opinion polling in Russia recently indicating that people want peace more than anything else. But peace is undefined. Peace could mean, peace and the complete capitulation of Ukraine, peace and, the resignation of Putin. We don't know. They just want peace, whatever that means. So, these opinion polls are really very hard to interpret.
How realistic is to find international investments during the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think we have to separate two things, investment and financial support. Because we will need financial support from our partner countries, but I do think that key financial support should come from confiscated Russian money. State Russian money that can be found throughout the world, and money of Russian businesses that support Russian regime. Because what they did in Ukraine, it's unacceptable, and they have to pay for that at some point, and they will pay for that. We have seen already statements from Polish Prime Minister that money have to be confiscated, not just frozen. We have seen concrete steps from Canadian government and from US government, from our partners, towards this activity. This money will be used to restore our critical infrastructure, but we will also need private money. Private money will enable Ukraine to develop our economy to a new level, like 2.0 level, bring new technologies, bring new companies that will ensure access to regional and global supply chains of Ukrainian companies and their partners from throughout the world.
So this sum is quite possible to get.
It is possible. It will be a hard war because we have to coordinate this activity with many countries throughout the world. But Ukraine is already effectively working with partners, and I'm positive that this will be possible. Probably we will not be talking about 600 billion in 2023. It will be a gradual financial support to rebuild Ukraine, and it will be done in accordance to a so-called new Marshall Plan for Ukraine. And that initiative will be definitely created and coordinated between Ukraine and key international partners.
How many companies that run business in Russia are ready to invest into Ukraine?
Well, we have seen more than 1,000 companies that stopped business in Russia. More than 200 companies stopped investment plans in Russia. We, as Ukraine Invest, governments of Ukraine Investment Attraction and Support Office, we are in touch with all of them. So we have about tens of effective communications. We have seen company Kingspan is the Irish global company that was one of the first ones to leave Russia and one of the first ones to announce significant investments into Ukraine. They will invest more than $250 million. They will create more than 1,000 jobs in Ukraine, and they will build a number of highly technological campuses to produce construction materials in Ukraine.
So we've separated the financial support and investing into Ukraine. Can you name any companies who are ready to invest into Ukraine during the war?
Well, I just mentioned Kingspan. Yep. They already announced, and we also support several projects in agri-machinery sector, in metalworking sector, in pharmaceutical sector as well. We have some requests, but we cannot announce them until there will be a solid decision on behalf of the company to do so. The companies send us daily like tens of requests to do business in Ukraine. Ukraine is a very strong brand now, probably not for the best reason because we have war, but we have great respect from international business to Ukraine, and they are very much interested to do business in Ukraine and to start planning this. What is important is that any investment project can be separated into two stages. Stage one is it's a planning stage, and stage two, it's a practical implementation stage. So stage one can be done during the war easily. Companies can plan investment, they can obtain documents, licenses, permits to do business in Ukraine, and that takes time. So we advise businesses to start doing this now. Start your planning stage, because when the war will end, you will be the first one and the most ready one to start practical implementation of your program. And planning stage does not take so much money from you. So it could be literally 1 or 2% out of the total cost of the investment project. Because the most important part is when you need to go into brick and mortar stage and to bring your equipment into Ukraine.
You've compared the situation in Ukraine right now with the Marshall's Plan after the World War II, but at that time, the world has paid more than $125 billion. How much the world will pay to rebuild Ukraine, and who will pay, and where should we get those money?
Well, I think you will not get money to cover your trade deficit. If people say, please pay our trade deficit, they won't do that. So you have to channel it into something productive. And there are still some state-owned companies around Ukraine which have a lot of skills. And I think if you coordinate that, if you make a, I've worked with the industrial committee in the Ukrainian parliament, and I think if you set up some kind of coordinating office like the Marshall Plan was, then you should get input from your industry. Where do we have capacity, and then you try to match that capacity with the goodwill that you get. Importing things from the Ukraine without duty, things like that, and that will be very useful. So I think it's a matter of coordination in a sense, and I think politically it would not be a problem to get all these people to get this thing coordinated from all the political parties. I would think that would be possible.
Now, I could ask you a question about the Ukrainian national currency. So since the start of the full-scale invasion, hryvnia has weakened by 25% so far. But the national currency has shown the alarming stability over the past few months. And some experts say that that's a kind of a compressing spring effect. Do you agree? And do we have to expect the weakening of hryvnia?
Well, normally in the situation like that, you would see a tendency for weakening. But the problem with that is that your foreign debt will go up, right? So I'm not the expert on the monetary side. I have some friends who do that. My strength is more on the productive side, and I think you have had similar problems like Georgia. Georgia also wanted to be a democracy and a market economy, and they had an enormous trade deficit. But unfortunately, the advice you get from the EU and from the World Bank and from the International Monetary Fund are not the best kind of advice. So before, let's say 20 years ago, Belarus had a much lower wages than the Ukraine, but the Belarus has not played the democracy game, and unfortunately, if you want to be friend with the World Bank and the IMF, you have to accept more free trade than the country really should have. So a very not very simpatico government like the Belarus has been doing well, has been doing better than the Ukraine in terms of wages, not because Lenin is on the square in Minsk, but because they have actually continued the kind of industrial policy that all Western countries at one point used to have. So I think it's free yourselves from the IMF and the World Bank, and also partly from the EU. You know,
okay, and where should we borrow money? Where should we borrow money? Where can we get the money, and what should we do with the debts? Because we got lots of them, like billions of dollars.
You may have to do like Argentina has done to default, but that's not me to say. I don't know enough about that, but I think your long-term trade problems can only be solved by increasing your production and increasing your sales abroad. And the goodwill, the wave of goodwill that you have, will help you doing that. So I can't help you with the debt, but it's very problematic, and the interest that you have to pay is also very problematic. Yeah. But that's a different subject, really.
Yeah, but we still do have another problem. Like millions of Ukrainians have already left Ukraine, and they continue to do so. So how will this affect the military economy of Ukraine? And when will the war end? So what should we do? Like millions are abroad.
Well, I think one of the reasons that you accepted the more than 1,000 pages from the EU without reading it properly was that you wanted visa. You wanted Ukrainians to be able to work in the European Union, and I think it's a very sad situation that when the main export item of a country becomes its most skilled people. And this is what we have seen in many countries. You know, in Mexico, we've seen it in Argentina, we've seen it in many countries. And maybe devaluation and default is part of the solution for that. And that may be something that you're able to negotiate. But as I say, you are having, fortunately, an enormous wave of goodwill from all over. From all over the world, and perhaps take a look at what the United States is doing at the moment, which is upsetting the European Union so much, which is they're subsidizing their own manufacturing industry. And where have they learned that from? From China, right? So try to take a big picture out there and see, and you see that the fair rules are breaking down, and you shouldn't be the last country following the fair rules.